Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining our webinar today regarding local government and addressing psychosocial hazards through crucial conversations. So we really appreciate you attending. My name's Josh Marshall. I'm the General Manager of Crucial Dimensions. For those that maybe not know who Crucial Dimensions are, we're the exclusive licensee of Crucial Learning's training programs. So you may have heard of Crucial Conversations, Crucial Accountability, Crucial Influence. All are proven global programs in addressing behavioural change within workplaces. And we'll talk a little bit more about that later today. Roger will be kicking off shortly, but one of the primary reasons why we've set up this session and we're going through one of these key areas that many local governments are talking to us about at the moment that we've worked with nationally is really around developing the skills, the language, and the confidence of effectively through crucial conversations and the behavioural change that can come from that in how organisations can be more proactive in how they address psychosocial hazards and risks within their workplaces, but also in their personal environments as well. So I'm going to hand over to Roger now, who will go through what we've highlighted. And if you've got any questions, please just raise your hand or put it into the chat. But yeah, thanks for joining. We're really pleased that you're able to make the time. Thanks. Over to you, Roger.
Hey, good morning. My name's Roger. I am. Sorry, I've just been asked about the slides, and that's just popped up there. So let me see if I can get the slides up on that share screen. My name's Roger. I'm currently the manager for Adelaide Hills Council. I am the People and Culture manager. I recently started there previously when I first got involved in Crucial Conversations when I was working in Southern Adelaide Local Health Network. Now, I worked in Southern Adelaide Local Health Network as the People and Culture manager. And when I started there, it was because the reason that we looked at Crucial Conversations was because the biggest challenge that we faced was the number of clinicians that were trying to deliver good quality service. But at the same time, the biggest challenge that they faced was in having individuals working in multidisciplinary teams that weren't actually able to work with each other. Now, I was there for a couple of years, and when we looked at all the various programs that there were about, we looked at fierce conversations, we looked at difficult conversations, we looked at the difficultly fierce conversations programs. There's hundreds of programs that are out there, and one of the things we noticed was that almost every single one of them referenced Crucial Conversations. So we got in touch with Crucial Conversations and we asked them about the opportunity of being able to deliver the program. Now, one of the challenge with the Crucial Conversations is that it actually has, it's a 2-day program. And so obviously from when you work in government, this is a real challenge for us. So being able to find 2 days is really difficult, but everything that we focused on was very much about being able to get the behavioral change that we were after. When we ran that program, one of the things that we found was that more and more individuals became signed up to the program. And in the end, over a period of about a year and a half, 2 years, more than 450 of our most senior clinicians signed up to the program. They found the time to do the 2 days. Now, this wasn't a mandated course. It wasn't required. It was optional. And one of the things that it showed me was the value of the Crucial Conversations framework in being able to help individuals have those difficult, awkward, challenging conversations. Now, I spent 7 years with the local health network, And then I moved over to education. Now in education, our education department over in South Australia, which is where I'm based, you can obviously tell that I have a South Australian accent here. So when I'm over in South Australia, our education department is about 32,000, 33,000 staff. Now I moved over to manage the leadership development program, and that leadership development program worked with our 3,500 Band A, Band B leaders. Now, our Band A and Band B leaders were our principals, deputy principals, coordinators. Now, the biggest challenge that there is in education, ironically, is not the classroom delivery. The biggest challenge is being able to help people work more effectively. Interestingly enough, if you look from an education perspective, the biggest impact on a child's learning is the teacher that they have. The second biggest impact is your principal. Is your principal able to create the cultures that work to be able to do that teamwork? And the biggest challenge that we've then got is whether we can then help those principals create those environments. And that's really where Crucial Conversations came in. Now, during that, again, we looked at a range of different options and we still couldn't find anything better than Crucial Conversations. And I have tried. I happen to be a trainer in Crucial Conversation. I'm not a shareholder in Crucial Conversations. I'm not an employee of them. I will deliver the training, particularly for government. But for me, I used Crucial Conversations because it's the single best framework that I've been able to find to help people have the difficult, awkward, challenging conversations. When we rolled that out in education, we had 1,500 people that signed up for it over those couple of years in which we were rolling it out. Now, one of the things that happened was we ended up having to run programs in holiday times to be able to make sure that people were able to fill that. Now, I personally, if this had been me as a principal, I would never take my holidays to go and do 2 days training. That probably says more about me than about some of our educators. But they would take that time to come and do it. And part of that was because of the value of that. When I left education and then moved to the city of Onkaparinga, we had 900 staff. We're the second biggest geographical area that we cover as a local council in South Australia, the biggest by staff and also the biggest by number of residents that we have. We have 10% of the population of South Australia within our council area. And the biggest challenge that we face as a local council are those psychological risks, the psychological safety, and being able to help people work effectively together. I've recently just moved to Adelaide Hills. If you do a Google search for Adelaide Hills at the moment, you will see that we currently have a number of psychological risk factors which are happening, which are resulting in some negative media for us. This is currently my 4th week with the council, and the big challenge for us as a council is how do we go about creating that psychological safety? Now, the reason, if we can go on to the next slide, please, the reason that we look at this is because you would be aware these are the psychosocial hazards that we face as a local council. Now, it ranges for everything from lack of role clarity through to poor organisational change, bullying, where we have frontline staff that are facing violence and aggression on a day-to-day basis. We have frontline staff who are working in remote and isolated areas. We're coming into bushfire season for us here as a local council. We have challenges with how we manage that, our working from home arrangements, but working from home arrangements which work for individuals who work within catastrophic fire areas, how that then portrays itself as poor organisational justice, the challenges that come through all of that. So we're really keen to be able to bring in the Crucial Conversation framework. And part of the reason for that framework, and as a purchaser of the material, one of the things that I particularly like is the new Speak Up tracker, which allows me to start to track and manage how effective the initiatives are that I'm putting in place. So obviously we want to create a culture in which we have staff and managers who are able to speak up. For me to be able to know whether the programs in which I bring in are working or not, then I want something that allows me to show that. Ultimately, I want to be able to show that if I spend 10,000, 20,000 or more on crucial conversations, it's going to give me a much higher return on safety. Is it going to reduce my incidences of bullying? Is it going to reduce the numbers of claims in which I've got? Is it going to help me create a more physically and psychologically safer working environment? If we can go on to the next slide, please. One of the things that I would then always start with is, for me, what I am after is better results. The way in which we ultimately, I think, as a manager for people and culture, this is what we are after. We are after ways in which we can get better results. The thing is, the way in which we get better results is by having better actions. The way in which we get those better actions is by being able to make better decisions. The better decisions only come from having better information. And this is why I think crucial conversation is so important, because better conversations allow me and my staff to get better information. Better information then leads to better decisions, which leads to better action, which leads to better results. So we don't do crucial conversations because it's a good thing to have. And we would do crucial conversations because what it does is it leads to better results. That's the sole reason for us to have these more open, transparent, upfront, and honest conversations. So if we see on the next slide, what you'll be able to see is a crucial conversation. Now, there are crucial conversations we would generally view will have three aspects to them. So the first aspect is going to be that they have opposing opinions. Now, just because you have an opposing opinion, it doesn't necessarily mean that that automatically makes it a crucial conversation. So let's say that you go home tonight and your partner has made you a fish pasta dish, and you thought that you were having a vegetable pasta dish, but to be honest, you don't mind which. You'd have preferred the vegetable pasta dish, but you're just grateful that your partner's made your dinner. Like, it doesn't happen all that often. So you've got opposing opinions, but it's not a crucial conversation because there aren't high stakes and there aren't strong emotions. But let's say, for example, you go home tonight, your partner's made you that fish pasta dish, and it turns out that you are highly allergic to fish, and your partner knew that you were highly allergic to fish. So now you can see that what we have here is I have the high stakes and I also have the strong emotions. So when we look at this, crucial conversations is about having opposing opinions, strong emotions, and high stakes. Now, just because those factors are not there for you doesn't necessarily mean that they're not there for other people. And this, I think, is where often in councils we can get ourselves a little bit stuck in government as well, because we can go, well, I might have an opposing opinion, but I don't see this as being a high stakes matter, and I maybe don't have strong emotions about it. But if the other person has that, if they have that opposing opinion, strong emotions, and high stakes, then you are still in a crucial conversation. Great example of this would be, let's say, for example, your teenage child comes home. They're distraught. They've just split up with their long-term boyfriend or girlfriend. So they've been going out for like 2 weeks. You personally think this is a good thing because you think they could have done so much better. However, they are now destined to wander the earth alone, forever unloved, cast out from society. Okay, so you can see there that there's the opposing opinions. You don't have the high stakes. You don't have the strong emotions, but those high stakes and strong emotions are there for the other person. That's what makes it a crucial conversation. And I think a lot of the times when we deal with these situations when we look at the psychosocial risk factors that we face. Sometimes we get ourselves into difficulties because we don't understand that we're in a crucial conversation when the other person is very clear that they are in a crucial conversation. So we can see on the next slide here, what we can see here is this is essentially the model that we use. Now, this model works equally as well for your personal life, as well as it does for your professional life. If you look at this from the lens of psychosocial risk factors, what we are looking to do is we are looking to increase the pool of shared meaning. Now, the pool of shared meaning is nothing more than a fancy way of saying the thoughts, feelings, opinions, and emotions of everybody in the conversation are understood by all. Now, notice, it doesn't say that we agree with the other person. So crucial conversations is not about agreeing or any of that kind of thing. It's about, do I understand where the person is coming from? So you can see when we talked about, if I understand where the person is coming from, I have better information. If I have better information, I can make better decisions. If I make better decisions, I take better actions. Better actions lead me to better results. And this is why it's so crucial for us. You can see around that pool of shared meaning is this idea of safety. So if we can create that pool of shared meaning and we can create that safety around it, then we can get the information that we need that's going to allow us to make better decisions, allow us to get better results. However, we can then see that around that ring of safety is this idea of silence and verbal violence. So silence and verbal violence would be anything in which somebody withholds their meaning. So we've all sat in on meetings. We were sitting there and our boss, maybe the chief exec, says, here's my great idea. And we look around the table and we go, that's a terrible idea. And we look around and we go, oh, everybody else thinks this is a terrible idea. And then we think, surely somebody's going to say something about it. It's such a bad idea. Somebody must point this out. And nobody does. And the challenge that we've then got is we then have the meeting after the meeting. Okay, that takes place. That's what we mean by silence. I know what it is that I want to say. I'm not going to say anything about it. I have withheld my meaning. Ultimately, the organization ends up making a worse, because it is poorer decision. It has poorer information. It makes a poorer decision, which then ultimately gets poorer results. Conversely, verbal violence is a very emotive phrase, has a lot of connotations around that. If you do the training, you will spend a fair amount of time in unpacking essentially what we mean by verbal violence. And in our workbook, there's a whole page around what we mean by that term verbal violence. But for the sake of this, verbal violence in which we would see anything in which we force, compel, cajole the other person towards our perspective. Now, let's say that we're sitting in that exact same meeting. Our chief exec says, here's my great idea. We look around the table, pretty sure nobody else is on board with this, so we're about to disagree with it. And the chief exec finishes with, here's my great idea. No one disagrees with that, do they? And we go, ooh, good point. Actually, no, you're right. Let's stick with this. Okay, that's that verbal violence the chief exec has used. I'm going to force, compel, cajole the other person towards my perspective. Other ways in which we do it, we hog the meeting. We use absolute statements. Everybody knows that. No one thinks this kind of thing, and we force and we compel the other person towards our perspective. We can see that by doing that, we are not filling that pool of shared meaning, of shared understanding, which means we have poorer information, we'll make poorer decisions, we'll get poorer results. So this is part of the challenge. It's also why I really like the Crucial Conversations framework, because it's applicable to every conversation that we have in some ways. There are other resources that I use that can help enhance it, but for me, this framework is the simplest, easiest, and most practical one that we can work with. We can see then, if we move on to the next slide, Part of the challenge that we have, and I think this works really well from a psychological safety perspective, is more often than not, we often end up choosing the right conversation. So if we go with this idea of how am I going to get better results, if I choose the wrong conversation to have, I'm not going to be able to put myself in a place in which I'm able to get a good result. So what we want to do is we want to get the better results by making sure that we're going to choose the right conversation to have. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to teach you a little skill with regards to this, which comes specifically from Crucial Conversations, so that you then have something that you will be able to apply in the next 15 minutes, which is pretty good for one of these seminars. So information and a very practical skill. So we're going to use the chat box a little on this as well. So if we look at the next slide, one of the things we would see is for us to be able to identify whether a conversation, what is the right conversation to have. Every situation involves three aspects. So the first aspect would be content situations. So content situations would be where there's a single instance of a problem, either the action itself, its immediate consequences. These would be our content issues. Pattern issues would be anything in which there's a recurrent problem, pattern of behavior over time. 3 incidences or more would generally be considered to be a pattern. Relationship, how the problem affects our working relationship. So a good example of this, let's say that one of my tree cutting teams, they constantly start 15 minutes late. Okay, so the first time they start 15 minutes late, they turn up 15 minutes late for shift, that's a content issue. Okay, single instance of a problem. Let's say that same individual then turns up late for shift 3 times in a 9-day roster. Okay, we would consider that to be a pattern, a recurring problem, pattern of behavior over time. Pattern can be a little bit subjective. So we could see that if they turned up late for shift 3 times over the course of a year, we wouldn't say there was a pattern. Okay, so there's a little bit around the seriousness of it. Conversely, if they rolled a truck 3 times in a year, we would say, ooh, bit of a pattern there. So generally, the more serious the incident, we'd see the longer the time frame we would give it. It's a little bit subjective. You would kind of use your judgment on that. But that would be what we would consider to be a pattern, 3 times or more. In this scenario with the individual who is late, we can then see if this continues for a couple of months, it now starts to affect my working relationship with them. So I'm starting to not trust them. I'm starting to have maybe concerns about whether they really want to be here. I'm starting to have concerns about whether they're actually following all my proper safety instructions. I'm starting to can have concerns about whether they're missing out on their toolbox meetings and getting any safety briefings around that. Maybe concerned as to whether they are enjoying working in the team, whether they have concerns, whether they're starting to look elsewhere. So we can see that within almost every situation, there's going to be a number of content issues. So single instances of a problem. There's going to be a range of patterns. That's where we see 3 incidences of or more of a particular type of content. And then we're also going to see relationship issues, which is how the problem affects and impacts on our working relationship. So what I would like you to do is, and this is where it becomes a little bit, from pretty much from here on in, it's a lot more interactive. So if we turn to the next slide, what we can see here is that we have a little scenario. So this would be a little scenario that I've got for you. We can see here that, let's say that your director has grown accustomed to asking you to produce complex reports for her, not asking because it's part of your job, but rather because you have some background in dashboards and know how your system works. To make matters worse, it's often last-minute requests taking you away from other priorities. She's just asked for a special last-minute report that's time-consuming to produce. Not only is it tough, but she needs it by 3 p.m. today, which is way too condensed because she needs to provide an elected member request. Top it all off, you don't believe it's going to provide her with the information she needs, but she's your boss, and if she wants it, she gets it, right? This is obviously, there's a lot going on in this scenario. For us to be able to make better decisions, to make better results, we need to make sure we are having the right conversation. So the first thing that we look at doing is unpacking what are all the content issues. So within your chat, what I would like you to be able to do is just put in what you see as being some of the content issues. So the single instances of a problem. Let's see what everybody's saying on this. So there's 31 of you. Oh, there we go. Excellent. We're getting responses already. I'm just going to move my chat box so I can make it a little bit bigger and see. Okay, so we've got a couple of instances. Okay, so Cheryl's come up with the time frame. Absolutely. Kerry's then come up with insufficient notice. Steve has said, I've got other priorities. And Mark's come up with position of power, the threat of job security. So I'm going to guess the content issue is that I feel that I can't say no to it. Kerry's come back with not part of my job description. Steve's got stress on my other work issues, and Sue's come up, is it the right outcome for the director? Okay, so you can see that all of these are single instance of an issue. Okay, now Joe's then come in at the end there and said, I don't think it is content. So I'm guessing that Joe is saying that thinks it might be a pattern or a relationship issue on this. Let's see what happens here. So patterns, what are some of the patterns that we see? They're going to be different from the content. Content, single instance of an issue. Pattern and content issue, which is repeating itself. Steve straight in there. Boss has asked before. Absolutely. The requests are often complex. So we can see that complex can be a single instance, but there's a pattern of them being complex. Kerry's come in, repeated requests at last minutes around this. Steve's got that always tight time frames. Okay. Danielle's got, I've got the knowledge of dashboards and know how the system works. So they're constantly doing this. They're constantly asking me around this. So these are some of our pattern issues. Okay, last one then. What are some of the relationship issues that we are facing in this situation? So if you were in this situation, what are some of the relationship challenges that you are now facing? Right. Steve's just gone, I'm getting pissed off. Okay, I'm getting angry about this. Absolutely. We've got the power imbalance. We've got trust issues. We've got the relationship. Great pick up there from Mark. The director wants to please the EM. Absolutely. That would probably also be a content issue as well. I want to keep my EM happy, which we do, don't we? If we work in council, it's like I need to be able to try and keep them sweet around this. There's Sue's gone with the power to challenge the director to say no to prioritization conversations. And then Mark's gone, my director controls my future. Yeah, there's a lot of relationship issues within there. Now you can see that in this little scenario here, it's only and then Sue's just popped up with failure to trust the ones who should be doing the reports or develop them to a level required. That's a great relationship issue that we've got there. Okay. Now you can see that within all of that, that must have given us somewhere in the region of 15 to 20 different possible conversations that we could have. Now, normally, what we might do is we might pick one of these. So we might decide, do you know what, I'm going to talk about the time frame for this report. And we might go in and we say, hey, boss, can I get a word with you? Sure. I want to talk to you about this last minute report. I don't think we're going to be able to make this time frame. And the boss goes, "Oh, that's fine. I can give you another week." And that's it. Conversation's finished. And we leave there and we go, actually, that's not really what I want to talk about. What I really wanted to talk about was the fact that I don't feel that I can say no to you. I'm not even sure this is part of my job. Okay. But we've missed our chance because we chose the wrong conversation. Conversely, what we might also do, and I think this is pretty common as well, is we might go in and say, actually, boss, I need to have a wee word with you. I need to talk to you about my workload. In fact, that last project you've given me insufficient notice about it, and the time frame's really tight. In fact, I've got other priorities on this. I'm not even sure this is the right outcome for you. I'm not part. This isn't even part of my job description, and it's creating stress for me. In fact, I've noticed that you do this an awful lot. The requests are always complex. You always seem to be asking me with very limited timeframes. You seem to be taking my knowledge of dashboards for a good enough reason to do this. There seems to be a power imbalance around this. I'm actually getting fed up and angry about this. I really don't trust you. I'm starting to lose respect for you. And in fact, actually, I don't think that I can say no. Okay. And we blurt out absolutely everything. Okay. Absolutely. Steve's got like, take a breath. Absolutely. We blurt out everything. And then in our personal lives, when we do this, it's generally finished with a phrase, and you never start the dishwasher. Okay. We just let everything go on this. Okay. And this doesn't help us in being able to get a better outcome. Now, in crucial conversations, one of the things that we learn is it's not about whether we're always having relationship conversations or about content conversations. One of the things we do learn is that if we are not getting the outcome that we're after, generally what it tells us we are having the wrong conversation. So more often than not, we will have a content conversation when instead we should be having that pattern or that relationship conversation. So if you're having to have the same conversation time and time and time again, it generally means you're having a pattern conversation, and you should be, it generally means you're having a content conversation, and you should be having either a pattern conversation or a relationship conversation. Good example of this, I remember working in health, in HR, one of the questions, one of the individuals that's going through the training goes, I don't understand this. I have been having this conversation with a person about them turning up late for shift for the last 3 years. So I'm having the conversation, and what that tells us is we are having the wrong conversation. Because if I'm constantly having that content conversation about the fact that you are late coming in for a shift, I've probably got more of concerns about trust, the relationship, whether you really want to be here, whether you're a team player. So it tells us that we're having the wrong conversation. Now we can see just in the chat there, we see Helen's said, oh, don't we ask with compassion if the director has challenges they can't manage? And absolutely, Helen's spot on there. And that's what we talk about around that pool of shared information. Okay. So the aim in crucial conversations is not to find ways in which we can force, compel, cajole everybody towards our perspective. It's, I need to find out the information that I'm missing on, because once I find that information, that allows me to make better decisions. If I make better decisions, I'm going to be able to get better results. So this is how we would look to use crucial conversations. That's just one of the little skills that we use. I find it particularly helpful because from two areas. So first of all, when we are dealing with psychosocial risk factors, it's really critical for me to be able to make sure that I am creating safety within the workplace and the conversations in which I have, so that I can make sure I am getting all the information and not just assuming as to why something is happening. I've been teaching crucial conversations. I've now been teaching crucial conversations for about 8 years, primarily within the government space, because governments just It's just that little bit different, isn't it? It's just different from the private sector. There are interesting challenges which are unique to government. So I find that that framework really helps me in having my conversations. The second bit that it then allows me to do is the more in which we have these conversations, which are about exploring information and filling that pool of shared meaning, the easier and more likely it is that I'm going to start to make better decisions around how we manage our workforce, how I manage a particular issue, and that actually reduces as well, it reduces my psychosocial risk factors. I am in the process now of starting to roll this program out for my fellow managers and my directors. And then we'll be looking to roll it out to our people leaders, because if we can get them to go into more conversations, wanting to fill that pool of shared meaning, we reduce, from an organization's perspective, we reduce our psychosocial risk factors, but we also do probably the most important thing, which is actually being able to help people feel heard and to be able to create a safe environment for them to be able to input their information into that conversation. I hope that you have found that both interesting and informative. And so I'd kind of like to throw open. Does anybody have any comments or questions about anything that I've covered off on there? You can either put it in the chat or I don't know, can we open it up for if somebody wants to ask something verbally? Are there any comments or questions from anyone? No. Oh, there we go. There we go. There, I knew there would be a couple of questions. Yeah, so Mark's raised a great point. Staff need to be comfortable to be able to have this conversation with the senior officer. Absolutely, could not agree any more with that. And that for me is, we do tackle this. We do tackle in the training some of the particular challenges that we find on dealing with people who have more authority than you. Because if you don't make them feel safe, so if we could maybe go back to our model that we've got here, I think which was slide 6 or slide 7. If we go back to the model, we talk about that area of safety. So if we can make people feel safe, then that's a key skill. Because if we don't make them feel safe, they'll use their authority to shut us down. And I think for me, that's where the framework comes in around this. So then Kerry says, how do you start the conversation that this is needed? So there are some particular techniques that we start off on how to be able to start that conversation, primarily focused around what our good intent is, which makes for an easier way for doing that. So I hope that helps. Are there any tips for elected members to handle crucial conversations during workshops? Again, that would be, so that's an interesting one. That's where you can start to see that in my experience, where we can start to see a lot more of that verbal violence. And by that, I mean the force, compel, cajole people towards my perspective. Sometimes it happens because they're very passionate about particular issues. Sometimes it's because we feel, a lot of us feel that this is how I get my point across. One of the things that we would then look at is on day 2, how do we help the other person input into that pool of shared meaning, but without putting other people offside. So this is always going to be one of the challenges with one of these sessions. Okay, so essentially there is the 2 days training is chock full of skills and techniques that you can use and we've covered off on half an hour of it. But there are very particular skills around that. Kerry then asked, what if people don't see there as a problem and no one wants to upset the status quo? That's a great one. So that would be, again, what we're faced with here, our model tells us, is that this is a safety issue. So I don't want to upset the status quo because I feel safe. I know exactly what I'm doing and you know exactly how things operate, and that creates safety for me. So what we need to be able to do is create that safety for the individual as well. And this kind of leads on to that next comment, which was about change management. You know, when we look at change management, what our model tells us is we tend to have two responses to change management. We tend to have that silence, I'm going to shut down, I'm not going to say anything, or the verbal violence, you're wrong, this sucks, kind of thing. And that tells us, again, from a change management perspective, we would see we need to be able to create that safety. Now, one of the things that I love about Crucial Conversations is whatever your change management methodology is, whatever your policies are, your procedures and all the rest of it, change management, Crucial Conversations doesn't take away from any of them. What it does is it enhances them because it has that framework to create that safe space for you to be able to get that information in there. I know that we're running out of time here. A couple of other comments. Mark said it's a leadership question. Does the boss invite the conversation without fear or favor? So can you just tell us a little bit more about what you mean by that, Mark, just so I make sure that I answer that one correctly as well. And then Steve said, great comment, love the comments about picking the right conversations and the challenges that we have when we get this wrong. And then Mark said, some people don't care if you're under pressure, they're focused on getting what they want to satisfy their ego or need to look good. I would totally agree with that. Absolutely. Some people absolutely do not care around that kind of thing. And one of the things that tells us is ultimately that's the bit that doesn't help us get better results. Now, some people are quite happy to do that. And if they get a bad result, ultimately, they may well go and blame other people around it. Generally, what I then find is that if you create a culture in which people are having those crucial conversations, those difficult, challenging conversations, what you find is those people quickly move on because they are being challenged by it. So totally agree with that. And then Mark's followed that up. Is the boss open to having the conversation? Some don't want to be challenged. Absolutely. Could not agree with that anymore. And so for me, one of the things I've learned is that there is a real opportunity for me that if I can go in and have that open, honest, respectful relationship, challenge, but do so in a way which is respectful and keeps the safety for the individual, then what that does is that creates that stronger, more trusting relationship. That's certainly what's worked in my experience. That seems to be what has worked for a lot of people when they implement the skills and techniques that we talk about. I hope that's been useful. I'm going to just throw back over to Josh just to do a last minute wrap up on that. My name's Roger Hunter. If you want to, and I'll put it in the chat as well, so you can email me at rhunter@ahc.sa.gov.au, and which is my full-time job. And then also from a Crucial Dimensions perspective, where I'm master trainer, roger@crucialdimensions.com.au. I wanted to put in my my government one as well, because I know sometimes in government it's like we might want to have that discussion or look at how we can work together. So if any of you would like to work with me on any of this material, please let me know. But I'll now hand over to Josh.
Thanks, Roger. Really good session. Really important session to have. And thank you for everyone that attending. Great interaction on the chat, which is always fantastic. So yeah, thank you for making the time. Really appreciate it. To give you a sense as well around how I've been, and I have a lot of conversations with local councils, both in New Zealand and Australia. To Roger's point there, and there's a number of the comments there that are related to the boss having the conversation, opening the conversation. And Roger, I've worked with you a little bit now in terms of some of the work that you've done, and it really does start with the learning, I guess the learning and the practice or the advocating and the modeling at a leadership level first, and then really embedding that into the organization, those skills throughout the organization. That is best practice that works, because then it becomes, as I mentioned right at the start, there's common skills. It's based on a common framework, and the language and the confidence that is created and the safety is just permeates the organization. And the organizations that really follow that type of model just really excel. So that's just to give you a sense of how some organizations are going about it. I'm more than happy to, as I said, Roger, reach out to Roger or myself. I'm more than happy to share some insights into what we're doing. But firstly, just thank you for making the time. And as Roger mentioned, this is one slice of the program. So there's another 8 modules that we go through. So you've got a taste of how you can unbundle what's going on. There's a hell of a lot more to get through from there. So yeah, thank you for the time, Roger. Really appreciate it. And yeah, take care. Have a great day. Thank you.